Hello to all of you. Well, it's from a very stormy afternoon here in Neisner that I wanted to share with you. We've got Michiel Lucas online as well, that's also going to be sharing a lot of the information. And Dr. Dolf de Roos is also going to be joining us. It is 6 a.m. in Phoenix, and a number of our guests and friends in Singapore are also online, and it's 9 p.m. in Singapore. So we really are having a global occasion. We welcome all the people who are in South Africa as well. So we've got all three parts of the world on three completely different time zones, which is why we're doing it at this time in terms of where we are. Now, a lot of people talk about investing offshore. A lot of people want to understand the strategies and the systems. But really, particularly in crowdfunding, people are talking now in fancy terms like curatorship, etc., etc. But property's been around for a long time. Real estate has been around for a long time. And at the end of the day, there's only one thing when it comes to property, and that is in terms of if you're trying to manage your safety and ultimately your wealth preservation, then you're going to have long-term success. And we've had the privilege of working with some of the best in the world over the last decade or so, and specifically over the global financial crisis. It was fascinating to watch. The people that only chase capital growth generally bet against winter, and it was only a matter of time when winter arrived and they went bankrupt. And those people that focused on income not only survived but thrived. And ultimately, if you're focusing on income, it all comes down to due diligence, the quality of the asset that you're investing. How stable is this asset going to be no matter what happens, politically, economically, both in your country or internationally. And so today we really wanted to focus this presentation, this webinar, on how to be safe. How do you do due diligence? What are the steps? Because unfortunately, when it comes to property investment and international property investment, there are so many stories. I mean, there's just breaking news in Singapore is that Eco House has actually taken $70 million off Singapore investors. Now, Eco House is a affordable housing developer based in Brazil. They actually raised, if you look down the bottom here, they raised $30 million in 2 days in 2013. It's absolutely phenomenal. And yet, we did our due diligence on them. In fact, John Chin, one of our partners, flew all the way to Brazil and came back, and his feedback was no, that he wasn't comfortable. Henny Besadenhout met them at MIPIM in France, the biggest property event of the year. And again, we did further due diligence and we weren't comfortable. And so, unfortunately, today, investors are finding out the truth. But 18 months ago, we did it. We went through the systems and they didn't pass the test. And today, we're going to share with you those systems so that you too can make educated and informed decisions. A lot of people know about this story with Tannenbaum. He took some of the most highly sophisticated and wealthy people in South Africa and in Australia, and is actually accused of a scam that was over 1.5 billion. And the real challenge is that investors who are looking to invest overseas all want the same things. They just want to be able to look at different opportunities. They want to be able to diversify and hedge. They want to be able to manage risk. They want to be able to do it safely. And really what is so frustrating is that the stats are remarkable. Literally 4 out of 5 people, more than 80% generally, that invest overseas actually lose money. And so everything that people want, safety and wealth preservation, they don't actually get, and they lose money. And that is why safety for us is such an important component, and why we are going to focus so strongly today on what it is that we're doing. I love this little saying, safety first. The safe way is the best way. And really, that's our philosophy. Every single part and component of our body, in terms of when we look at it, in terms of our investment methodology, in terms of our company values, in terms of even the people that are part of the company, is that it's safety. And when it comes to money, it's ultimately about wealth preservation. Now, there's 4 steps to wealth. The first one is wealth accumulation. The second one is wealth growth. The third one is wealth preservation. And the fourth one is wealth transfer. Now, wealth accumulation is one thing. Wealth growth, well, we, through our growth plan, can assist people to invest in higher growth opportunities in some of the leading markets around the world. But the one that we want to focus on today is wealth preservation. And really, when it comes to income-based projects with good assets around the world, in good economies, in the right cycle, in the right sector, with the right partner, it's ultimately about long-term investment. And anyone that's made real wealth in property or real estate has invested for the long term. And then ultimately, it's about wealth preservation. And so just to give you a little bit of comfort and confidence, who are we and what are our systems and why should we be listened to? Well, in quite simple terms, our investment committee and our team, we've put together what is recognized as the authority internationally. It's one of the most sophisticated and experienced teams ever put together in terms of international real estate. We've got over 227 years worth of experience in the investment committee. We've facilitated over 10,780 investments internationally, a total value of 1.34 billion US dollars. We've invested on 5 continents. It's very, very seldom. You might have Donald Trump that's really, really big in North America, but very few people can compete or understand the complexity and the diversity of investing in different markets, different continents, different countries, and how it actually works. And to be honest, we've written over 19 books. Some of them are New York Times bestsellers. I often joke with people, one of them is mine, and Dr. Dolph DeRoos has written 16 of those books. And this morning, he will be joining us just to share with us some of the elements and components in terms of his thoughts. So I did say that I would share with you the 2 most important things. I do believe that most people in life really do try and overcomplicate things. I think one of the strategies of the 21st century were very much to try and overcomplicate things and to really, the more you keep people insecure and not understanding what's going on, the more that they are prepared to pay people money, in terms of middlemen and professional fees. But actually in life, it's quite a lot more simple than that. And if you can get simple and if you can understand it, then really one can focus on what one needs to do. And I shared with this in a recent webinar, but these are all books that I've read recently and people that we've had the privilege of spending time with. Snowball from Warren Buffett is one of the best books I've read on Warren Buffett. The Winning Investment Habits of Warren Buffett and George Soros. Jim Rogers, who actually lives in Singapore and is becoming a friend of mine. I'm having breakfast with him again when I'm back in Singapore. Dr. Dolph DeRoos, who we're going to hear from today, who wrote Real Estate Riches, which is recognized as the book internationally for investing in real estate. I actually read it at the age of 19 and attribute a lot of my success to it. Rich Dad, Poor Dad, Robert Kiyosaki, Henny Besaidenote, that's a picture of Henny Besaidenote, our chairman of Wealth Migrate, an extremely wealthy gentleman that has listed 2 companies, one in South Africa and one in Australia, and has been investing internationally for more than a decade. And then this gentleman here, Yanni Moolman, who is actually a billionaire out of South Africa and personally owns 184 regional shopping centers. And just in the last 3 months or so, we've had the privilege of spending a lot of time with these people and obviously also taking the principles out of the books. And there were 2 overriding things that we say all the time about what people need to do if they want to be successful, both in local real estate or international real estate. And again, if you read all these books, if you spend time with these people, you'll get to understand their strategies. But in simple terms, the first thing they do is they get all the right information. They do all the research. And once they've done that, they don't listen to others. They do all the research. They understand what's going on. They have the systems in place to be able to understand everything. And then ultimately, they partner with people. It's those 2 things. You just need the right information and the right partners. And that really, for me, is the crux of what it is that we're doing and why we're doing it. And what we want to share with you today is the system that we use to be able to achieve those 2 things. And it's those 2 things that have helped us achieve our success. If you look here, this is just a picture that I want to show you up in North Dakota. Not many people have heard of North Dakota. It's in the middle of nowhere in America. It's really, really cold and it's right up near Canada. And yet they've got, they're nearly producing as much oil there now as they are down in Texas. It is one of the most exciting things from a geopolitical perspective that are happening in North America and to be fair, on the whole planet. And this was actually us on the ground doing an investigation trip. You know, the number one way that you get the information is to be able to get on the ground and get the information. And then we need to have the systems as to how to do it. But I wanted to start, and I wanted to hand over to Dr. Dolf de Roos. You know, I did mention about his book, Real Estate Riches, and the impact that it had on my life at the age of 19. After reading that book, I went out and did my very first project. And I did my first international project when I was 22, and my first development when I was 24. And I attribute a lot of that success to the lessons that I learned from Dr. Dolf de Roos, and I'm privileged to now be his business partner and his friend. But you know, Dr. de Roos, you're online, and I just wanted to really ask you. I've heard you talk about it before, but you know, a lot of people try and overcomplicate things when people try and get clever about making money in the stock market. There's a whole lot of clever JP Morgan and, you know, Harvard MBA graduate people, but you always say that there's a number of ways that people can beat the averages. And I just wanted to start with you at a macro level, because at the end of the day, getting wealthy happens slowly, and it's just about accumulating wealth preservation, but ultimately outperforming the market and getting better returns on the income and the capital that you've got.
Well, that's absolutely right, and thank you for your very kind introduction, Scott. It's a pleasure to be your business partner, and I'm very honored to hear what you say. You're absolutely right. Many people try to complicate it far too much. And one of the things that I really relish and enjoy about real estate is that it is, in essence, extremely simple. You know, I often see analyses of how you invest in other things, and it is so complex. And you need to know so many rules, and then you need to stay at your screen for 16 hours a day to make it work. Whereas you can, in essence, invest in a piece of property and put the title to that property in the bottom drawer and essentially forget about it for the next decade. Because chances are, if you followed a few of the simple rules that there are, chances are that you'll do extraordinarily well. And you mentioned before that it's all about information and partners. And one of the things that you learn as you go on about this is that these aren't independent rules. They are very synergistic. They work together very well. In other words, if you have the right partners, then you don't need necessarily to have all the information yourself, because your partners have information that you're then partnering with. Or conversely, if you have the right information, you don't need a lot of partners because you have everything you need at your fingertips. And many investors, in fact, work very well on their own because they can be nimble and quick. You can imagine if we had a committee of 20 people that had to decide whether to buy a single home, let alone a commercial building, just to get 20 people in a room can be a logistical nightmare. So sometimes it's good to be lean and efficient, and other times it's good to have partners. And I like the fact that you read a lot of books, Scott. I mean, I get inspiration from the books you read, and I get references as to what you're reading, and I try and get them myself. I'm a big fan, as most of you know, of reading. I always say readers are leaders. Or another way of putting it is, he who does not read has no advantage over he who cannot read. Meaning, if you don't read, you may as well be illiterate. And you pick up many, many ideas from reading books. But there's one aspect of real estate that I've written about, but I've hardly seen anyone else touch on it. And as I look back, it forms an integral part of just about every deal I do. And it's the topic that we're nominally talking about today, Scott, which is how to beat the average. And to give that some perspective, I'm always amused at how a lot of people just want to ride the average. So I'll see articles comparing the average growth in the stock market or the share market to the average growth in real estate. And people will say to me things like, Dolph, you know, last year the share market went up by 7% and real estate only went up by 8%. So can you justify investing in real estate when, you know, you've got all the hassles of ownership and management and tenant defaults and all that? Why not just put the money into the stock market? You'll get 7% instead of 8%, but you'll have a lot less hassle. And I can understand where they're coming from, but it's such a simplistic argument, it doesn't hold water. The biggest difference, of course, is that if you want to invest, say, $1 million in the share market, then in essence, you need to have $1 million cash. Whereas if you want to invest $1 million in the property market or the real estate market, you don't need that same $1 million. It's a very interesting difference. So that argument doesn't work. Secondly, the biggest difference that I can think of is that if you ask me how to beat the average in the share market, I have yet to hear a share market aficionado come up with a cogent, lucid, and verifiable method of beating the average. I know lots of people have theories, lots of people try it, but very few succeed. Well, I should not say very few. About half of them succeed. So let me give you another example. You know, you've got mutual fund managers, and they tend to invest in a variety of shares around the world. And they all try to beat the average. And, you know, the funny thing is about half of them do. Half of them do because, on average, the other half don't. That's how you get an average. And I'm always amused when you see signs or advertising in, say, newspapers saying, you know, we beat the share market average for the last 4 years in a row. And I always chuckle to myself, because what I'm really hearing is that 5 years ago they didn't beat the average, or else they would have said, we beat the average 5 years in a row. So you might then say, okay, well, fair enough. We can't think of a way of beating the average either. But what about real estate? Can you beat the average in real estate? And my answer is yes, you absolutely can. In fact, I have got, what is it now, 18 ways of beating the average. And I don't probably have time today to go through them, but I want to give you a taste of them. I want to give an example to show you how it is possible to beat the average in real estate. Because once you understand this, once you see this, and either you invoke it yourself or you have partners who do it, the world is different. Suddenly you're not restricted to dealing with averages. It's a phenomenal difference. You know, I don't know, I get really excited about this, because once you figure out how to do this, it is just an astounding difference, and it can double your returns, because if you get 10% better than average and you compound that over the years and throughout your portfolio, I mean, you're going to do incredibly well. So how do we beat the average in real estate? And by the way, I've been invoking this obviously in my own investments, but also when I work with other people, or when I advise people, or when I work with people, and we'll be using it here. And there are some very, very simple ways of doing it. And I liken it to this. Now, if you're based in Singapore, which I know most of you are, then it's difficult to invoke the first one in Singapore, because Singapore is essentially an island that is almost round in shape, and it is about 30 kilometers across. I mean, it is very homogeneous and coherent. But I think you'll appreciate that even in Singapore, there are popular parts of Singapore to live or work or have office space, and not so popular parts. In other words, you've got an average growth rate for Singapore, but there will be portions of Singapore that grow at slightly above that average, and therefore, by definition, for there to be an average, there will be portions that grow slightly below average. So that makes all the difference. But when you come to a country like the United States, which I think it's fair to say, I won't make many claims about the differences, but one difference is that the United States is vastly bigger. When you have that, then it's much more dramatic here. We have parts of the United States that grow at way above the national long-term average of about 9.7%, and therefore there are parts that grow way below. Why would this be, and why is it so different from Singapore? Well, let me give you an example. There are towns in the state of Pennsylvania, like Pittsburgh, which had major steel mill industries, or just single industries. And if that industry goes out of business because they're losing that industry to a place like China, neither good nor bad, it just is, it's the global economy working. But if that town employed 80% of its workforce in that steel mill industry, for instance, and the steel mill industry closes, then suddenly the town all but collapses. Hardly anyone has got any work, nothing does well, people start leaving town, real estate prices come. I mean, you might get negative growth there for a while. And there are hundreds of examples of this happening all over the country. And therefore, because they are growing at way below average, there are other places that grow at way above average. Now I can give you an example. I live in a city called Phoenix in the state of Arizona. It is known that over the last 50 years, we're not talking 50 weeks or even 50 days, over the last 50 years, Phoenix has had an average capital growth in property values of way above the national average. And it's been consistently number one, advised for the position of number one with Las Vegas, Nevada. They toggle between 1 and 2, but the third fastest growing city is about 50% below that. Now, a little disclaimer here, everyone. It doesn't mean you should only invest in Phoenix and Las Vegas. There are challenges with these cities. Las Vegas is largely based on the casino industry. Well, that's diminishing a bit. But there are many other great places to invest. But just by way of example, if you were to choose a piece of property in Phoenix at random, then on average it would do better than the national average. So there's an interesting point. But I think you'll also appreciate that within a city like Phoenix, there are suburbs that grow faster than average for the city and suburbs that grow slower than average for that city. I can give you examples for anyone familiar with the place who's perhaps been here. Paradise Valley is known as a very ritzy upmarket suburb. The lot sizes or section sizes are at least an acre here, so that's about nearly half an hectare that you have to have as a minimum. In other words, you can't subdivide. The homes tend to be big. It's all very expensive, and the growth rate tends to be high. And there are other suburbs where, you know, the growth rate is lower than average. So if you invest in a high growth suburb in a city that's already beating the national average, you're not only going to beat the city average, but you're going to beat the rate at which that city beats the national average. And then we can take it one step further. Without belaboring the point, there are clusters of streets within those high growth suburbs that for some reason have a faster average growth rate than other clusters of streets in that same high growth suburb, in that same high growth city. And it could be that they're on a ridge and they have a beautiful view over the valley, or if you're near other interesting features, a lake or something. It could be that they're shielded from the prevailing winds or from the sun or something like that. So you'll always get these pockets. So if you recognize this, and by the way, it does not take half a lifetime to figure out where these areas are. I can go into a new city, be it Singapore or KL or Bangkok or anywhere, and within an hour I can know what the fast growth suburbs are. You can ask any of a dozen people and take their average answers. I mean, you can check it out on the internet. It's really easy. So by investing in these clusters of streets with a nice view or something in a suburb that has a higher than city growth rate, in a city that has a higher than national average growth rate, oh my gosh, your ability to beat the national average growth rate is almost assured. I'm not going to say absolutely, then someone will hold me to it, but it's almost assured. And I think this is almost intuitive. And these 18 ways I've got of beating the average, I know you're probably all saying, oh yes, we want to learn this. This is hot and exciting. And when I tell them to you, you say, well, I kind of knew that. Just like I would forgive a lot of you if right now you said, well, it's pretty obvious, Dolph, that if you invest in a suburb that has a higher than average growth rate, in a city that has a higher than average growth rate, we're going to beat the national average. But the question is this, it's not, was it obvious with the benefit of hindsight, but are you using these things in your investing? That is the real question. So that's one example. I want to give you a couple more because I think it's sort of not only an interesting point, but it's a fun point. It is well known all over the world that if you buy a piece of property that is near a body of water, and I should be a bit more explicit here because I guess I don't mean a sewage treatment plant. You could say that's a body of water, but I mean something like the ocean, right, the sea, or a lake or a river, that those properties in the long run tend to grow faster than average, faster than properties not by that same body of water. And, you know, in Australia, this is taken to the extreme because there often when you read an advertisement for a house that is for sale, then they'll call it a beachfront property. And just to let you know, beachfront properties does not mean that it's actually on the beach or by the sand. To qualify for that, that's called absolute beachfront. So as you move away from the coastline, you go from absolute beachfront to beach view, to beach walking distance, beach biking distance, beach driving distance. Then you're in Ayers Rock, which is the center of the country. And as you keep on going in the same direction, you'll get back to, you know, beach driving, beach biking, beach walking, beach view, beachfront, an absolute beachfront. And I'm being a little bit facetious here, but it's true that as you get closer to the sea, the price and the growth rate tends to go up. And you might ask, well, why would that be? If you're near the sea, you're only going to get bad weather blowing in from the ocean. No, a bunch of reasons, and I think it's almost intuitive, but for those of you who want some explanation, everyone likes a view of the sea. It's calming. You can see sailboats go by. There are fewer neighbors that can look at you because no one builds a house out at sea. Well, not significantly. I mean, I know there are boat houses and things on the shoreline, but you know what I mean. And it's just, you've got great views. It's valued more than the average property. So if you buy anything near a body of water, you'll tend to have a capital growth rate that's higher. And I'll give you another one. And, you know, it's funny, you can talk about things for decades while you're in real estate, and then suddenly you think you're going to become part of the statistic. And what I'm talking about is, in the Western world in particular, not so much in the developing world, many parts of Africa this doesn't apply, but in the Western world, the proportion of people who are elderly is increasing almost at an exponential rate. So a generation ago, there were 4 people working for every retired person. That's why the taxes that we applied to those working people, we could use some of that to pay for the social welfare benefits and retirement and pension benefits of the elderly. But now the numbers are changing. Now we've only got 3 people working for every 2 who are retired, and before long there'll be 2 working for every 3 who are retired. So the proportion of elderly is increasing. Now you might say, well, that's going to cause major problems, and you can focus on that problems. Or as a property investor, you might say to yourself, well, what can we do to benefit from this? Well, do you think that the demand for retirement homes, assisted living facilities, rest homes, and other things that cater to the elderly, do you think they're going to increase or decrease at a rate faster than the average for that country? And the answer is pretty obvious. They're going to increase at a higher rate than the average stats for property. So if you invest in things that cater to the elderly, like I mentioned, retirement homes, assisted living facilities, hospitals that specialize for the geriatric set, if you like, Alzheimer's diseases, other diseases like that, there's going to be an increasing demand for that. And you might think this is morbid, but I know that there are companies operating, and all they do is build retirement homes because they feel they've almost got an unending demand for it. And retirees have a different investing style. I know one company, just to seed a thought for you, and this is another thing, I know I'm jumping around, but this is what I love about real estate. There's no limit to your creativity. You're only limited by your imagination. So what they do is they will sell one of these retirement homes to an older person at the current market rate. But part of the contract is when they pass on, then the retirement home will buy it back at the same price that the retiree paid. So let's say that they buy this unit for $200,000, be it Singapore dollars or UK pounds or whatever, 200,000. And 8 years later they pass on, then the family gets the 200,000 back. And then the retirement home will sell it to the next person, but at the then market price, and then it might be 300,000. In other words, the retirement home sits on the capital, they cover their costs, they give the capital back, but then they sell it at a higher price. Now you might say, well, who would do that? Who as an older person would invest in that? Well, it's working for this company, and I'm not saying we should pursue that, but I'm just saying there's such a demand, that's the sort of thing they can do. So what I've done is I've just shared 3 separate and independent ways of beating the average in real estate. That, I agree, with the benefit of hindsight, look pretty obvious. But just because there are these 3 ideas, and by the way, I've got 15 more, but we don't have time to go into them now. Just because there are 3 ways, that doesn't mean to say that we can only invoke any one of these independently of the others. We can invoke them in pairs or even triplets, and then, I believe, the benefits of using them will compound, or to be more specific, the extent to which they exceed the national average will compound, and we can have an investment that far outstrips the national average. And let me give you a very real and practical example. As you know, I'm based here in Phoenix, Arizona. I've been here, I think, for 14 years now. But prior to that, I lived in San Diego in California, a beautiful city. And prior to that, I had some time in San Francisco, also a stunningly beautiful city. Now, when I was in San Diego, I lived in a suburb called La Jolla. It's supposedly one of the top 12 suburbs in the country. It's absolutely astounding. So the fact that I was in that suburb of itself already theoretically would have given a greater than national average growth rate in property values. But on a weekend day, you could do it any day of the week, but I tended to do it on the weekends. I'd go for a walk, and there was a seal colony there. Seals as in the mammals, these sea mammals, the seals, S-E-A-L. And they were all wild. They weren't tame or anything like that. They were wild. And they would come up to this beach and sunbathe on the beach. And there were big notices to everyone saying, these are wild mammals. Please don't get close. You don't know what they're going to do. But despite that, everyone walked down and would walk within a couple of feet of these monstrous mammals. I mean, monstrous in size. They're actually quite beautiful to look at. And especially when they had their young puppies or babies, whatever they're called there, you know, you had to be careful that the mothers wouldn't lash out to protect their babies on the perception of some threat from you. But it was just this magical thing to experience these seals sunbathing and frolicking in the water. But as you left the seal colony and climbed back up the stairs to get to the road, on the other side of the road, there was a retirement home. So I want to ask you a question about this. Firstly, it's a retirement home, which means they're catering to the elderly. And secondly, it's in one of the fastest growing suburbs in the United States, one of the top 12. So far we've ticked 2 of those boxes. And thirdly, obviously, because it's walking distance from where the seal colony would be sunbathing on the beach, it had a spectacular view of the Pacific Ocean. So it hit 3 of those 18 things just straight out of the starting gates. So my question to you is, in your heart and in your head, do you think that this retirement home could possibly have had a higher than average capital growth rate? And, you know, the answer in my mind, of course, is absolutely. And they're just some of the simple mechanisms by which I believe you can beat the average. And folks, you can beat the average in anything. That's why I always say, if you want to do well in life, if you want to exceed what other people are doing, if you want to exceed people's expectations, it's not difficult. You don't have to go from working, say, 40 hours a week to working 110 hours a week. Just by going the extra mile every now and then, you will achieve amazing extra results. And that's one of the things I really admire about Scott, is he always goes the extra mile. He's always doing the extra bit and the extra communication and the extra webinar, for instance. You know, Scott organizes webinar, full credit to him. And I always say that successful people do not do one thing 100% differently. They do 100 things 1% differently. And I really want you to think about that, because if you can team up with and partner with people who have that philosophy, who have that attitude, who are always looking at tweaking things. And, you know, I should sign off now, but everyone knows that when I get a microphone, I tend to go on and on. But even in the commercial building that I operate out of, and we own that building, we're constantly looking at how to improve it. So let me give you an example. One of the advantages of commercial buildings over residential is that the tenants pay for the electricity. So in that sense, you could say, since all my tenants are paying for the electricity, what do I care, you know, what they're using? Well, I do care, because if I make my tenants happy, then they'll tend to stay longer. They'll be willing to pay a slightly higher rental, etc., etc. So many years ago, we switched our building over from having incandescent lighting and inefficient TL tubes into what at the time was the latest thing, CFL, compact fluorescent lighting, and the new T8 fluorescent tubes with no ballast that were very efficient. We're going beyond that now. We're progressively switching the entire building over to LED lighting, because it's just even more efficient, and it's at full brightness the moment you turn it on. In addition, in all the lavatories and toilets, we're now putting in automatic switches, because what we found would happen is people would tend to leave the restroom and they'd leave the lights on. Well, the lights also control the extractor fans, and if you do this on a Friday afternoon and it's a long weekend, everything's on all weekend. And it costs a bit of money, not much, but a bit of money to put in these automatic light switches. But the building looks more modern because of it. It feels more modern, and the tenant appreciation goes way up. So it just goes to show this aspect of beating the average. You can do it in so many aspects. You know, the biggest compliment you can get is when someone comes to you and says, do you have any space available? And whatever your answer is, they add, oh, by the way, I was speaking with my friend so-and-so, he's one of your tenants, and he said, if ever you need to lease commercial space, make sure you see Dolph and see if he's got anything available, because you'll be happy you did that. That's sort of and that's another example of going the extra mile and trying to beat the average in all aspects of your life. And with that, I think I better stop now and hand back. But thank you so much for giving me this time and for listening, everyone. I appreciate it so much. And I hope to see you all soon. I'm headed back towards Singapore, and gee, I think it's a couple of weeks. So I hope to catch you all very soon. Thank you. All right. I can't hear anyone there.
Sorry, I was talking away with my mute on. Let me just switch this off. There. Yeah, I was talking away with my mute on. No, I was just saying, Dolph, you talk a lot about the averages, and thank you very much for that, and beating the averages. I know one of them is you talk about population growth and the fact that, you know, Japan has a declining population growth, Europe has an aging population growth, you know, the United States has a positive population growth. I mean, I saw a fascinating stat just the other day in terms of new wealth, and they're expecting 160,000 new millionaires in China by 2020. When you compare that to America, where there's only 6 to 9 million accredited investors in the entire country, it's quite phenomenal.
Wow, that is phenomenal. I didn't know that stat, but it just goes to show, you know, when I was a kid, I learnt Japanese, and it was the language to learn because Japan was an up-and-coming nation, and those predictions were correct, by the way. They went from producing almost no cars in the world to dominating the world production of cars and cameras and electronic watches and all kinds of gadgets. But my daughter is not learning Japanese, she's learning Chinese. And I think that is the new nation of the future. And by the time she has children, it may have shifted again. It might be, you know, they say that Africa is the up-and-coming continent. But it just goes to show how these things move and shift and how you've got to be aware. And you either should read a lot, which means you're partnering with authors, or you should talk with a lot of people, which means you're partnering with the people you talk with. And that's, you know, one of the benefits of turning your television set off and reading things with useful, substantive information. I didn't know that stat about the 160 million millionaires. That's 160,000. That is phenomenal. And if we could just capture 1% of those and do great investments for them, I mean, you know, that's how the world is changing. So that is fascinating, Scott.
So I mean, look, it's a very good interlude in terms of, you know, the handover from yourself to Michiel, and I want to welcome Michiel onto the line. And really, Dolph, one of the reasons that I valued your input today is that, you know, when people are trying to understand how to outperform and beat the averages, there's kind of three components to it. One is that you've got to look at those macro trends that you're talking about. Then you've got to ultimately bring it down, and you've got to look at kind of which country. Then you've got to look at possibly which industry. Then you've got to look at, you know, which suburb, like you discussed. Ultimately, you've got to look at which partner you want to be part of, and finally, the very last thing is you've got to ultimately decide which property you want to invest in, and whether or not it's the right partner. And, you know, something we talk a lot about in the different research that we do, and it's in our documentation, in our private placement memorandum, is what we commonly refer to as GIDS. Can you guys hear me there? Yep.
Yes, I can hear you.
And it's effectively our global investment due diligence system, and it's a combination of all the different techniques, tools, systems, strategies that the different people from the Wealth Migrate Investment Committee brought together. And one of the people that I wanted to hand over to, and I know, Dolph, it's really early in the morning there, so if you need to duck, please do. And I really appreciate your time in terms of giving us the macro approach and how one beats the averages. Because now what I want to do is hand over to Michiel. And when I first met Michiel, he's a very interesting combination because he's an engineer by background who studied an MBA, which means that he loves doing everything on a spreadsheet. And when I first met him and he came over to America, actually in October of 2012, the questions he was asking me and the analysis he was doing and the due diligence he was doing and the tax, the systems, and everything else was quite phenomenal. And again, it's with a lot of honor and privilege that Michiel is also one of our business partners and in charge of our business development and very much one of the people that are key in terms of the due diligence and on behalf of the investors and ourselves in terms of our own investments, actually doing the due diligence. And if we look at GIDS, I'm going to just at a very high level, we've got the Global Wealth Index, which is a way of analyzing between different countries and where you invest. And again, we don't have time to go into this. We've got plenty of webinars or it's written in my book, which I will share with you later. We've got the global property system, which helps us choose between the different countries and where one should invest. Should you invest in Singapore, where there was growth last year of something like, I can't remember, Dolph, if you're still online, but it was like 36% when we were last there, I was reading. I think last year was 36% capital growth, which is phenomenal. But equally, when markets have risen like that, one has to, and there's a lot of government restrictions that have come in because of it. Or should you be investing in Brazil? Or should you be investing in South Africa or America or Australia or England? It ultimately helps you with a systematic and scientific way of looking at it. A lot of people underestimate the financial structuring. I mean, we did a huge amount of work with Grant Thornton to understand, and every country you go into is different. Every investor is different in terms of their tax, their structuring, their compliance. People always say that they just try and buy a property. We believe that buying a property or buying real estate is only about 20% actually about the property. The rest is actually made up in the tax, the structuring, the compliance, the management, the maintenance, and ultimately, the people that you're partnering with to execute on the opportunity. Now, again, today, essence and focus is not to go through the financial structuring system, although, it's something that's so important. The fourth one is the partnering system. Who do you partner with? How do you know that if you go to Brazil, you're dealing with a good developer, or how do you know that you've got a problem like what happened with EcoHouse? And I spoke about it in the beginning, and the fact that it's all over the press at the moment in terms of the investors that have invested there and the money that they've lost. And we've got a concept of the pig and the chicken, and again, it's a metaphor, but ultimately we only partner with people that are prepared to come to the table. We are only prepared to partner with people that are prepared to put their own money into the investment. If they're prepared to financially commit to the investment, then we like to do deals with them. We've got quite a sophisticated mechanism in terms of choosing our partners, but in simple terms, they have to have a lot of experience. They have to be dedicated to a niche. So like Dolph was talking, Dr. Duris was talking about the people that are in the sector with healthcare or old age homes, where they're specifically in a niche, or like Henny Besaidenout, our chairman, that's very, very strong in medical. And then ultimately we want something that's scalable, basically. Then we start to look at the areas in terms of the whole investment index and the due diligence. But this is really where I wanted to hand over to Michiel, because now if you take Dolph as kind of taken it at a contextual macro level, then we bring it down to which country, then we bring it down to who we partner with. But now, once you get to the potential investment index and then REAP, which is Dr. DeRosa's system to analyze different properties, it's at these points that we start doing the due diligence on the actual properties. And without further ado, Michiel, I wanted to hand over to you because you really are the best person to explain what we do and how we do it. And as an example, what Michiel's going to do is he's going to focus and try and condense 4 months worth of full-time work, not just on his behalf, but there were about 6 people full-time on it. And the due diligence that was done before we were ready to commit our capital and investors' capital to the $16 million deal that we just closed in the last month. the medical deal in Atlanta. So, Michiel, over to you. Do you want me to share your screen?
Yes, please. Thank you very much, Scott. Just give me some feedback. Is my sound hard enough, loud enough?
Yep, you're perfect. You're perfect. So,
it's a bit quieter from my perspective than Scott.
Michiel, if you just accept the, yeah, there it is.
Okay, super. How's my screen looking? Can you see it all?
Yep, we're perfect.
Super. Thank you, Scott, for the introduction. Also, thank you for the kind words. Ladies and gentlemen, what I want to do today is to go through the whole due diligence process, and I'm going to go into presentation mode. Just bear with me, where we are going to go through the due diligence process as a first, and then I'm going to go into a specific example, which is the Oakhill process or the Oakhill transaction that we did. So without further ado, I just want to give a quick overview of the project. We'll go into a lot of details a little bit later. It was effectively 7 medical practitioner buildings in the United States. The doctors who were the owners, they were selling it off to retire, and essentially it was an off-market deal. So just to give a bit of context, but what I'm getting into now is really, as Scott mentioned, we really got the whole due diligence process in quite a systematic way. So the first process that we went through was the due diligence release process. And this is the step just after what Scott explained was the global positioning system. We first look at which country, and when we look at which country, we have quite a lot of investment parameters, and a lot of these investment parameters we compile into a system which effectively tells you which country, which risk areas we're going to look at. I'll touch on that a little bit later, and that is actually before what I call the go, no-go process. So in the first step, we as an investment committee, together with Scott and Henny Besaidenout, we basically get these projects presented to us, and then we do, as far as I'm concerned, a policy check. Does it fit our policy from a trend perspective? And then very specifically, as Dolph explained to us so nicely, that whole intention is to actually beat the averages. So once we got to that point, we passed what we call the go-no point, and we actually released the project for a due diligence exercise. And that exercise, which I basically call in this block development, is the process which I'm going to explain today. So once we basically release it, typically in a transaction, it means that you have made an agreement with the owners of the project, or the buildings in this specific case. You agree a time period in which you may look at the buildings and really do a due diligence. And then after that period, you have the option to say, yes, I'm happy with the project and I continue. Or you have the option to say, no, thank you, it doesn't work. There maybe was a mistake, or it didn't fit your criteria, etc. And then once you've done and you say to them, okay, now all is fine, you come to the point where we actually, just one second, just want to get this down. We actually then release the project. And once we release the project, we actually will start managing the project. So this is the cycle that we go through. In the specific example, we did a due diligence release on the 1st of May. Normally this point is a little bit delayed because we make it conditional that the owners, the previous owners, gives us all the actual information of the project, and with the aim, or with the accent on actual. A lot of times we get transactions where in the commercial world, people are giving us pro forma figures, and that effectively means what they think the building can do. However, in our specific case and our process, we focus on, please, we just would like to know what actually happened. And once we get the actual documentation, then the due diligence process starts. And in this case, you can see it was a 3 months due diligence, which then ended on the 1st of August. And after the 1st of August, we had roughly 1 month from there until the 29th of August, in this case, where we actually closed the deal. What that basically means is that we create the investment vehicles in terms of legal structures. We get all the equity in, that means the investment money from the investors. And in parallel to that, we obtain the loans, and then all is into place and ready to go. And then what we call a closing is when we actually take title transfer of the buildings into what we call a special purpose vehicle. It's a local or limited liability company. I'll get to that just now. And then once we've done that, then we manage the project. And in this current case, we basically in the first 1.5 months of the actual investment, and the building is effectively owned by the investors now. The property manager has been appointed, and we're starting to manage the building. So that's just a high-level development process that we go through. So going a little bit back to what Scott and Dolph alluded to, before the go, no go, we really do our research. And I think Scott outlined the global GPS system, which I'm just going to reference quickly. It is a system in which we look at the risk versus the value. And Scott has written a very nice book on this. And please, if you would like to have this book sent to you after this webinar, just type in ebook in your chat box and we'll send it to you. What happens here, you'll see the factors that we look on. This is explained a little bit in detail in the book. But the main effect is that we analyzed well over 16 countries. And the main factors are the economic risk, the value of property in terms of discount, population growth, supply of demand, and the rule of law. So when we culminate these factors into what we call a GPS risk index, it gives us a certain rating in terms of which countries to look at and which return. Once we take this and we plot it, and just bear with me, I'm just going to shift a little bit. We actually plot it on a very nice table, which gives you a very clear idea of where to look. So if you look on this table, you'll see on the right-hand side, yield return with capital growth from low return to high return versus risk value discount going on the bottom axis to the other side. So it creates these quadrants. And then very interestingly, you can see we have identified at this point in time, high risk, low returns is United States. Low return, low risk is pretty much Australia and the UK. And South Africa at the moment we've classified as a low return, high risk. So just to give you an idea of where to go.
Michiel,
So
just a quick one. I know you've taken that out of the book. For those investors that are online from Singapore, as an example, when Dr. Doris and I were in Singapore in July, I updated the model for them, and I will share that graph at the end of this webinar as to where Singapore fits into that as well.
Oh yeah, that's super. Thanks, Scott. And going back to my discussion here, once we understood that we want to do that, the next major step that we are saying is that we would like to follow a mega trend. Really, to boil down to what Dolph has said, is we really like to beat the averages, because this is a longer term investment, typically 5 years, and if it's a substantial money in terms of your own percentage of spendable money for investments, then of course you want to know the time is well spent. So then we do a lot of research in this area, and one of the reports that we have found is the paper report. It is written annually, and this report, I'm just going to switch to it, very clearly indicated that the medical subsector in terms of commercial real estate, with quite a significant number of votes, has been elected by the community that subscribes to this report in terms of the real estate where they think, or the real estate sector where they think the most attractive opportunities is in real estate, for real estate investors in the next 12 months. So as you can see, most of them thinking healthcare, second is multifamily, and the last one, or the third one is industrial.
It's interesting. It's interesting. It's interesting you say that, because when Henny was at MIPIM, which I think I've alluded to already, but it's the biggest property event in the world. And in March this year, the most esteemed 20,000 of the most esteemed property professionals from all over the world get together. And the mega trend that they spoke of, there were three, and one of them was medical. So it's interesting that the research is correlates.
No, that is indeed like that. So from a Wealth Migrate's perspective, we have been focusing on healthcare and industrial projects, and we currently also investigating the multifamily space. But for the moment, for this discussion, the healthcare option is relevant to our conversation. Then, and when I go back to my presentation, I just want to get it back into the. So once we've gone that, so now we know it's in the United States. The mega trend is the medical industry, and now we start reviewing the actual specific opportunities. And this is where I go into my next step now. This was the actual project. So I gave you a highlight of the project. I'm just going to show you a little bit more details of it so that you get a bit of a feel of what we're talking about. These are 7 medical buildings. They were in Atlanta. As you can see, these are medical practitioner buildings. What that basically means is all the peripheral services that it's not taken care of in the hospital itself, but it's for the medical practitioners like a doctor and anesthetist and etc., so that they can have their practices in the vicinity of the hospital. And this is quite key. So from this perspective, it is also a significant thing when we look at buildings for these, let's call it doctors, is that this type of tenant from a commercial perspective is also a tenant that like to stay for a very long time in the building. The main reason for this is that if they take the trouble to install over and above what you as property landlord gives them, their specialized scanning and medical equipment, which is quite expensive to install, they don't really want to move. So it means the switching cost from one building to another building is high. But the most important thing is that these properties are located in centers where there's a lot of hospitals. So once the clientele of a certain doctor is used to where he is in close proximity of a hospital, he simply tends to be a tenant for life. So from that perspective, it's quite advantageous from a medical real estate perspective, that we found that the tenants are fairly long term. And in this specific case, we have one tenant that has signed up for a 10-year lease. So this is a blue chip client, Piedmont Hospitals, which is similar for the South Africans that's on the call, similar to our Medcare 11. I'm sure Dolph can help me with the example in Singapore. But so it means that the driver of this properties are the tenants, and if they are long-term tenants and they are not willing to switch, then we create a recipe where we can beat the average. And that's the reason why we really like the medical space. So
Michiel, just to butt in there for 2 seconds, apologies, but
Sure.
I had a real awakening when I was at Bondi Beach in Sydney in 2010 with Henny Besaidnout. And as I said to you, he's been investing in medical properties since 1992. And when he told me why, it was so obvious to me. I felt like a bit of an idiot that I hadn't thought of it earlier. But when he just explained to me that, like, look, doctors never move. They always like to have the same location. Generally, their licenses are connected to the premises, so it's even harder to move. They don't like necessarily moving and they're not as like entrepreneurial as, say, a business person that will look at the rent down the road as a little bit cheaper. And most importantly, it's the most economically resilient thing, because if people need, doctors, they need to go to doctors. And I mean, this was in the heart of the global financial crisis, and we were evaluating medical centers all over Australia that Henry Sainer was investing in. And when I got that, it just was such a mind opener to me. And I mean, I've been passionately focused on medical ever since, because it's kind of common sense to me, and added to that the trends that Dr. Duris spoke about earlier as well.
Yeah, no, I must be honest. It's such a common sense thing, and it also just struck me that that it is such a powerful method, and it's such a powerful method to actually plan and beat the averages. And when we go through the deal, people that has a bit of commercial background in terms of properties will see this is really a fantastic deal. Okay, so once we decided that this is what we want to do and this is why we want to do it, obviously we go through the actual big process, which is now the due diligence process itself. So what I've done is I've just expanded the block that I call development, as you can see here, with 4 blocks. These blocks are the process that I'm going to go through in a lot of detail. So after we basically in principle said that this deal would be good, we negotiated and made an offer, and we made the deal that we would like 3 months to look at the property, and if we agree after 3 months, then we will go into closing, which was a month later. So the whole process is a 4 months process, and what I'm going to go through now is actually the detailed steps in the due diligence process. What is very important in the due diligence process is that we have a lot of actors, let's call it actors. In the one sense, we as Wealth Migrate are the orchestra leader. So we orchestrate this process, and what happens is that the actual due diligence in the finance details is handled by our partner that brings us the deal. And our approach there is that they do the due diligence and then we cross-check them. And that's what I'm going to show you there. The second process is the financial model and stress testing piece of this. So once the partners bring the financial model, we add additional worksheets to this. And this is predominantly the function that I perform. And then we stress test this model to just understand how good or how bad this deal is. And the whole idea is to understand what really can go wrong. And once we understand what can go wrong, we call that risks. We then look at the risk, and then we see what risk can we mitigate, and we actually make plans for that and plan that in the model. In parallel to this, the bank says to us, listen, we're not believing what you're going to do. We are going to do our own due diligence process. And that was for me quite an eye-opener to what extent they also do a due diligence. So it means that there's actually 2 parties in parallel doing a due diligence. And then lastly, when we are more or less, let's call it halfway down the road, and we see that the process is most likely going to be a very successful process, then we start with the equity raise portion, and then we start communicating with the investors. This is also was part of my function. What's nice about it is engaging with investors. I found more and more investors are actually quite sophisticated. They know exactly what they want. And so my function was to communicate to them where we were in the process. What did we find? In this specific case, we had some fantastic improvements during the process. For instance, when we started the process, the medical buildings was 10% vacant, and roughly a month before we would release this project, we actually found the Picken tenant via our partner, and the actual vacancy dropped almost to 1%. What that basically means is that our income for this project has been secured for at least 5 years, and that was a significant breakthrough. And this type of information, obviously, it was quite a pleasure to communicate. Then lastly, before we actually do the final release, we start up with the legal contracts and all the, let's call it the mandates and the subscription agreements that governs this investment, which I'll also go a little bit into detail just to show you how much and how much, how many of these contracts we need to look at, and then obviously make them work towards a common opportunity. And then once we release the due diligence process, we then go into the closing procedure. The investors transfer the money into the escrow account. That's effectively a very special bank account that is set up with a lot of special rules in the United States to ensure that when investors transfer their money into the escrow account, that the escrow account, the only way the money from the escrow can be released is for this investment. So that is a peace of mind exercise for the investors. And then at the end, the star that I indicated there is effectively when we close the transaction, and in this case it happened on the 29th of August. And what it basically means is that the money is released to the seller, and the seller released the actual title deeds to us. Us meaning the investment, and the properties are then registered in the name of the special purpose vehicle. It's a legal entity, which I'll show you just now. Right, so that's the overview of the process. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to go to each one of these blocks in the middle, starting off with the actual due diligence test checklist that we've got. This is a checklist that has been built over at least, Scott, if I remember, I think it's since '92 from Henny de Sodenhout. It's a 140-point checklist that has been built over quite a lot of years from experience. And what I want to do now is just go into that checklist just to show you the level of detail that we actually go to and what we need to look at for this property, just to make sure everything is in place.
I think also just to let people know, you know, it was a combination of another very successful property investor that invested over $1 million themselves. Dr. Dolf de Roos was involved. You know, so there were a number of different systems that came to the table, including the accountants and our partners on the ground, the medical partners we got on the ground in the States. So my point being is that it was a hybrid, and it's consistently a evolving process, like anything in life, that's just getting better and better and better, so that that risk reduction can continue to get better and better and better, and the safety can be enhanced.
Okay, no, thanks, Scott. What I got on the screen now is the actual due diligence checkpoint register. I'll go into I'll zoom in just now, but I think what is important is that you will see that we'll have a column which is effectively the information that we are going to deal with. And then you'll see here in the middle is a little green robot system that we use. If it's green, everything was signed off. If it is yellow, it's in progress. If it's red, there's a problem. And then the last version of this Excel spreadsheet we actually print off, and then you will see we actually physically sign this off. And the records that is behind this, meaning the supporting documents, let's say for instance the rent roll, and that would be a supporting document that will be referencing to the schedule, and this actual documentation is then kept as our project due diligence documents, and it's quite extensive, where we have the actual documents. And this is what I meant earlier. When we ask for the rent rolls, we ask for the expenses. These are the actual documents from the previous owners, so that we can verify that that expenses or that transactions actually happened. Similarly with the bank statements, similarly with the tax statements, similarly with their insurance rolls, similarly with their levy payments, etc. So what I'm going to do now is to zoom in a little bit, and then I'm going to go through this list on a high level, just to give everybody an indication of what we looked at. And then remember, as if this was 7 buildings, we did this 7 times. So effectively, I'm just going to talk a little bit per building. Right, so I think the main thing that is driving commercial real estate is obviously the leases. So we went and actually got each and every lease contract, looked at each and every tenant's actual signed lease contract, looked at the previous lease contracts about 3 years back, so that we see what was the history of this project. Then we went through each tenant's FICA details, For those that are from South Africa, it doesn't only happen in South Africa. We actually did the FICA on the tenants in the United States. And then on the operating cost, we then actually went and looked at that. We actually physically did an inspection of the buildings and actually confirmed what was on the rental contract or the lease contracts. If it says so many square meters or in their terms square feet, if that is what is on the contract, we actually went and checked that. And when I was there in July as part of the due diligence, the bank actually sent out a land survey and actually physically measured the buildings. So this is to the extent that happened. And then I think one of the most important steps is we did a credit check on all the major tenants. As you can see, if you got a 10-year or a 5-year lease agreement, it's really the lease agreement is actually really backed up by the credentials of the tenant. So if you get a blue chip tenant which signs up a 10-year lease, then you can be pretty sure that you have a very good chance that that tenant will pay on time all the time during the whole actual leasing period. Then I think very importantly is that we have to also then go through each building and really go and look that these buildings are in the correct servitudes as per the town planning certification, the zoning certificates, the Surgeon General diagrams, of course the electrical compliance documentations, etc. We went through architectural drawings. We also cross-checked these buildings were built in 2006. We actually went back to the building plans and make sure they were actually approved. Okay, so yeah, so that's pretty much what we did there. And then the next major step for the due diligence is actually looking at the utility accounts. In America, this is quite a significant exercise. The main reason for that is that they have laws that can actually, let's call it, put a lien on your property if there was outstanding rates and taxes. So therefore, we call it the title should be clear, and that was a very, very specific exercise that we went through. And then lastly, if you see item 3.1.5, the rates and taxes, this is a significant portion of the expenses. So like most countries in the world, the authorities in which the building is located do a value evaluation on the building. Let's say the building is worth $2 million. They take a certain percentage of the value of the building and then make that the value of the tax that you should pay. So from our concern was that if we now pay for a building a certain amount of money, we would like to know from the authorities what would be the taxes that they will be charging us once we have done the transaction. So from us, that was a very important point. We actually employed specialists that actually goes to the counties and actually predict what the taxes will be. Of course, the authorities are not willing to give us that in writing, but within a very close percentage, we found that the taxes actually came out what we predicted. And we wanted to build that into a model so that we can make sure that the expenses is not more than what we anticipated. And I'll show you there, that was part of our stress testing exercises. The rest of the stuff is the standard list of what actually happened with the water and rates in the past years, etc. So I think this building you will see is the second building. We've pretty much gone through the same exercise. Here you can very specifically see the date of the last municipal evaluation. That's what I just mentioned. Then we went into the actual insurance side of things. Obviously, that is a very key component for us. So we looked at each building. Is it properly insured? Is it insured to the correct value? Is the replacement cost in place? What is the conditions of the insurance? Are all the bases covered? Then we went through the audited financial statements, which in this specific case, each building was owned in a separate company. So we had 7 financial statements, and we actually went and found the actual ones. And then lastly, to maintain these buildings, there's quite a lot of service providers. We went through all these service providers. In this case, you can see the access control, the air conditioning. So we went through all of that. Alarm system, car guards. So each one of them, I'm just going to make one example. For instance, the car guards. Who is the service provider? What is the copy of the contract? When it expires? What is the current monthly amount? The last date of increase, the percentage, the scope, and the specs. So for every building and every service provider, we went through that to make sure that is all there. I'm not going to go to all of that for now. Then fire services, very important, especially in the medical field. We need to certify that the building are conforming to the local requirements in terms of safety, health, and environment. Very strict regulations, and we want to, of course, comply, especially because this is medical buildings, and patient care and people in those areas are obviously of paramount importance. So I'm going to just scan down a bit. Yeah, then when they did the building originally, there was a lot of external consultants giving their professional reports and certifying that the buildings was built correctly. We cross-checked that. We also went to all the staff that is on site. We had discussions with them, understanding that we will be changing ownership. And of course, naturally, they would like to know what will happen to them. And obviously, we went through that process, discussing how we're going to do it, would it be applicable for them, etc. Then the whole next section is going into the maintenance side. As you know, the buildings typically have air conditioning, electrical system, plumbing systems, and all of that we had to do. There was the statutory stuff, which statutory test that I basically mentioned as well. Very importantly, also asbestos test, and then specifically in Atlanta, a lot of gas installations. So we need to make 100% sure the gas installations has been certified. The last thing we need is a gas leakage, and then our tenants and patients can get hurt. And then, of course, from a landlord perspective, we wanted to take stock of what we're actually buying. It's one thing to say you're buying 7 buildings, but what are you actually buying? So what we did is we went through each and every room on the buildings, making a list of, in this case, as you can see, the air conditioning, the serial numbers, the CCTV cameras. So we basically did a full stock take of each building, and had a look at the installation and what was it, when was it last serviced. Yeah, and then lastly, we came to the actual safe, healthy, and safe reports to understand what is the current situation of the maintenance and what is the issues that is currently happening there, and then making sure that those items are all in place. Get all the actual building plans, I mentioned that before, and then effectively make sure all the legal documents is in place. And then we did obviously a lot of visual inspections. And the whole idea of all these things is just to verify that we get a solid building. If we found that, let's say for instance, something is wrong, we then made a list of it, and then we actually mentioned that to the seller. If there's material items that goes wrong, we have the right to renegotiate the price downwards, hopefully. And this is the process that we go through in parallel with the seller. So we keep them up to date the whole time of what are we finding on the due diligence, and if they can explain it and we can accept it, then it's fine. But if something is missing, or we have to incur an expense to get, let's say, the fire extinguishers fixed up to the correct level, then we simply add or subtract that cost from their price. So this is the whole process. So as you can see, it's quite a significant process, and this is quite time consuming because it's really going into detail. So we did it on our accord, and then like I mentioned, I'm going back to this diagram, in parallel the bank did the same thing. So not only did we have to get the documentation from the seller, but we also had to provide that to the bank, and over and above that, the bank, of course, wanted to know who is the new buyers. So the whole due diligence on Migrate and Paul Chandra, in this case, our partner, his company, all his details, and then as well from the investors, we have had a structure where we have a lead investor, and even him had to disclose who he is so that the bank are comfortable to who they actually are going to hopefully borrow that large amount of money. They also did full FICA checks on us. They also did full money laundering checks on us. So that was quite erasing to get all these questions from the bank. But that was the process that happened there. And then I want to just jump back. The next step that I want to go a little bit into detail was the actual financial model and the stress testing that we did, just to give you the actual figures and what happened there. So I'm going to switch over to that now. Let me just get there. Okay. So what I'm going to do, Scott, just give me feedback. Is this good enough, or should I zoom out?
No, it's perfect. I can see it very clearly. And I was just thinking,
okay,
it's a huge amount of information. If people do want to ask questions, please just fire away and interact. I I always tend to, when I'm trying to understand the level of detail, and when someone's got an MBA from a university in the UK, they like to go into a huge amount of detail as well as, with the engineering background. Now, it's a necessity to safety and a necessity to wealth preservation. But if there is stuff that people want to understand, please fire and I'll ask Michiel the questions. But no, Michiel, it's very interesting. Thank you.
Okay, Scott, when you see a question, just let me know. I'm just into full presentation mode, so I won't be seeing the questions. All right, so in terms of the actual deal, just some quick basics. A purchase price is the price that we're going to pay to the actual sellers. And when we look at effectively a capitalization rate, it means the purchase price, or it means that the net operating income of the first year divided by the purchase price. So in commercial world, people talk about a cap rate. So you'll see that pretty often. Then we had these costs that builds up to the final price. The final price was $16 million. And then as you can see, the bank has limited us to 35% equity, which is this $5.6 million. And we added some working capital, and the actual equity amount that we raised was $5.725 million. And so that just gives a high-level outline of the project. So what it also meant is that the purchase price of the property was $224 per square foot. The total amount of lettable space that we had was 65,800 square feet, which is quite a significant amount. And on that amount, we had the vacancy rate of roughly 1.1%. So the internal rate of return, I'll show you how we calculate that. That, in our view, is the best method to compare projects, because the internal rate of return takes into consideration the time value of money during the investment period, and also your final investment amount being returned at the end of the investment period, as well as the capital gain. So that is a bit confusing for a lot of people. A lot of people think I could make, like, for instance, 10% per annum on my capital employed, typically like a bank interest rate. It should not be confused with internal rate of return. I'll show you a little bit later.
I mean, in simple terms, you know, internal
then
rate
what
of
was
return.
quite significant.
Sorry, Michiel, just quickly. In simple terms, internal rate of return is the undisputed method in real estate to determine and compare an apple with an apple, taking into account the capital deployed, the return that you get. There's 27 variables that are taken into account, both capital growth plus also your income yield, plus your risks, your insurance, your costs, everything. 27 different variables, but it is the undisputed methodology upon which to compare one investment to another investment. You there? Michiel,
Yes.
you there? Sorry.
Yes, I am. Can I continue?
Yeah, please, Matt. Sorry.
Okay. No, Scott, I fully agree with you. That's actually the only way to compare different projects. Right. So to go down from that, I think what is significant in this specific project is that when an investor invested, let's say, $100,000, we have geared that money to the tune of 65%. And in this specific case, we have obtained a loan of $10.4 million, and very specifically at 4.13% over a period of 30 years. I mean, this is significant in terms of a good rate. That helps us very specifically that obviously the bond payments that we have would be reduced. So that's the outline of the deal. What I want to do now is you'll see my worksheets here at the bottom. Everything that is gray was what the seller has produced to us. And what we did is we then added the yellow tabs at the bottom. Scott, can you just give me feedback? Is that visible?
Yeah, I can see everything. Yep.
Super. All right. So I think, like I mentioned in the due diligence process, the first thing that we actually did is we went through each and every lease contract. What is the rentable square feet, when it's going to begin, when it's going to stop, the rent base, etc. So you can see here, this was the 60 Oak Hill building, and then each and every lease contract, when it expires and when it will stop. Here at the bottom, you can see the total space that we would rent out was 65,846, and we ended up with a 1.2% vacancy rate at the end, which I'll just show you later. So once we got the actual contracts, we roll this out to an actual income table, which effectively takes each and every rental contract with the square meter and create for us an actual income. And what I've basically did on the side here is just cross-check the actual vacancy rate per building. Once we've got that together, we also then had a look at the operational budgets, in the sense that we wanted to understand what types of leases we got, and which is quite nice. In this case, we got a lease type which we call NNN. In slang terms, we call the triple net lease. What that basically means is that all the operational expenses of the building is paid directly by the tenant. So that means that if he overspends on water and electricity, it's his problem, and it's not our problem. So from that perspective, it's very useful to have triple net leases. However, we have, in some of the buildings, obviously we have gross leases. What that basically means is that the rental amount that the tenant pays us must have obviously enough in it so that it can pay the expenses as well. And then, yeah, so that is the operational expenses. Then the capital expenditure, maybe that everybody must understand this, is that the lease contracts also got something in which they call tenant installation. So what that means is that we are providing the building as a shell, and then we give them a fixed amount in their lease contract, which works out to a capital amount, like for instance in this case $26,480, which they have as a budget to do tenant installations. That means they can now come and install whatever they need to install to make their practice happen. And from that perspective, these tenant installations, we have to cater for that in the cash flow, so that we can actually physically pay the contractor and do the installations. And then from a rental perspective, we build that into the contract. So this is quite a significant amount that we had to cater for. And then also when these lease contracts are coming to an end, there's, for the leasing brokers in that area, there's obviously commissions payable, and that's outlined here, and we have to put all of that into our costs. So just to give you an idea, this is typically in the region of 6% for renewing or for getting a new lease signed up, and about 2% for renewal. That's typically the going rate at the moment in the United States. Right, so once we got all these basic things together, we simply build what we call a pro forma. In this specific case, it is now for each building basically the rental income, the operational recoveries. In this case, because this is a triple net lease, remember I mentioned that the tenant will refund all the operational expenses. This is the line that we use for that. Here you can see all the operational expenses. And then what we saw from the client is that if you look in this column, the operational expenses is $100,000, but we're only recovering $87,000. So in this case, it is an opportunity for us to actually recover more of the expenses. That basically means that our net operating income will increase, and we will actually have an increase in the building value. So this is very powerful what we saw during the analysis. And then you will see I've added here a simulation line to simulate vacancy, and we left additional vacancy in this line just to make the figures go a little bit less as good as it is, so that we have a bit of a cushion or buffer for in case something unexpectedly happens. So this is where we have stress tested the model, and we basically built in a little bit of a buffer. So for each of these buildings, we have the operational expenses, then we have the net operating income. Remember, I mentioned that earlier. The net operating income is the magic thing in a commercial lease, in a commercial investment. If you can make that operational net operational income go higher, you automatically increase the value of your building, because you divide the cap rate or the capitalization rate, which I mentioned earlier. If you divide, for instance, this 417 by the capitalization rate, say, of 8.2, then you will get the actual value of this building. So it's a very powerful mechanism in real estate, commercial real estate, that if you can decrease your operating expenses and increase the net operating income, you can actually make the building be worth much more. And that is one of our major targets during the operational period of this investment, is to get that expenses down. And when we have done the model in the beginning, we have seen that there is some very clear opportunities of expenses that we believe are too high, and with reasonable doubt, we can definitely improve that. That means that we most likely going to improve the actual value of the building during the management period. And then debt services at the bottom here is simply the actual debt payment. And then finally the net cash flow. That means that what these buildings are producing after all expenses has been paid. Very interesting. You might see these things. The lenders were extremely strict as well, that they want us to make sure that the building is properly maintained and that all the capital expenditure, we have reserve accounts. So these line items here, they actually force us to have escrow accounts. That basically means they force us to put money away for the likely event of capital expenditure. So it just makes the model even more safe, and this is really the key for us, to make sure that whatever we're going to produce in terms of results, and what we say in these models are the minimum that we're going to get. We don't want surprises. So our whole idea is that we would under-promise, and over-deliver. And that's the whole philosophy that we go in here. So yeah, now we add all these buildings together, and then we come to the bottom line where we have then the real final net operating figures here at the bottom, this figure here. And we also build in the escalations, the rental escalations, etc.
Mate, just a very quick one. Anton's asked a question here. Says, what's the danger of getting halfway through the raising process and not completing the raise amount required? There is a concern, but with the experience and the track record that we've got, generally we actually oversubscribed, Anton, and so it is a challenge. But the beauty with crowdfunding and where it's going is that there's a lot of transparency, and one can manage that process and ultimately make it more and more efficient. So it's certainly something that we actually see as becoming less and less of a problem going forward, as well as the fact that we've now, through the crowdfunding technology, we've also created blind raises, which allows people to commit to projects prior to the project due diligence being finalized, and then only once it's finalized would they actually commit and move their funds. So it reduces the timing dramatically. The second question that you asked was, do you make any upfront payment to the seller to secure more time to complete the due diligence and raise the capital investment? So in simple terms, with the seller, we do put down a deposit. There's a period where we're allowed to do the due diligence, and then it goes non-refundable. And in simple terms, we need to comply within the components of what's agreed in the deal. So particularly in efficient markets where there's good assets, you can't do this process for months and months and months. It's just what it is, which is one of the reasons we've got the systems, the team, and the people to be able to do what Michiel's talking about as efficiently as possible.
No, Scott, that is very true. Maybe just to approach the question from a different perspective, is that we are finding that the deals that are the better deals are the deals that wants to move quite quickly, and the deals that is giving us a very long time could be more, let's call it an average deal. So, so our focus with the blind rises is actually to be in a position of strength so that we can secure those exceptional opportunities for investors. So it's, in that case, it's more a question of the opportunity is fleeting as opposed to not able to raise all the money in time. Okay, I hope that answers the question. I think what I wanted to do next is just show you a little bit the vacancy sensitivity that we did. We actually played with the vacancy rate, and like I remember when I said at the beginning, we actually started off with a 9.2% vacancy, and during the process of due diligence within the last month, we actually, the seller brought us additional tenant, the Piedmont lease, and then we had the opportunity to actually bring the vacancy all the way, in this case, I just want to show you guys here, all the way down to 1.9%, which is effectively completely let out. The only, there's a little piece left, 780 feet, 784 square feet, which just in the one building is not usable at the moment. And so from that perspective, we actually got a fully let building, and that gives us quite a nice, secure income. The only reason that there was a little bit of lettable space here is not the fact that there wasn't a actual lease in place. The terms that we gave was that for the first 3 or 4 months, the Piedmont lease, we gave them free rent as an incentive to take the lease for 10 years. So because the value that we get from the building in terms of a 10-year lease is much larger than a 5-year lease, and we were willing to, instead of willing to trade on the actual rental rate, we trade on just a free rent component. So that was the sensitivity that we did, and that's also the simulation that I built in. Then I think I mentioned it before, the tenant reserves. As you can see, we had to build a very significant tenant reserve in $416,000. This was for the Piedmont lease. The bank actually forced us to increase that even higher with another $100,000 just to be sure. And those reserves are now in place, and currently as we speak, those reserves are being used to do the tenant installation for the Piedmont lease, and hopefully by when I get there next week, this will be complete, and then we'll actually go and inspect that installations as well. Right, so what I want to do now is, once we've done that, we wanted to obviously now get to the investor return. And what I want to explain here is effectively how the model works when you have a capital, or so in this case, an income project. So when we worked out the internal rate of return, as I mentioned to you, it is a function of the cash flow. You will see here on the side, it's from basically zero up to the last year when we actually pay it out. And you'll see here's the actual cash flows that happens in this specific example. The working capital we return at the end, the expenses to sell the building, the sales price of the building. The sales price of the building is a very important parameter in our model. I'm just going to jump quickly back to how we calculate that. When we look at the actual cap rate that we bought the project at, is 8.2, as I mentioned before. Now, this is a significant below the market cap rate, because we found that the comparable sales of similar buildings currently in that area, the cap rate is actually 7%, and we then chose the value of 7.25% as an exit cap rate. So just to give you an example, if I change this value, you'll see this 20 million, which is the actual current estimated sales price, can change significantly. So if I make this 8%, that value will go down. So you can see if we pay effectively 16 million for the transaction, we only make additional 2 million. And if I bring that back to 7.25, which is based on the current comparable market sales, we know that within a very conservative space, we can get $20.4 million for that building. And that figure we have used now here in terms of investor returns. And as you can see, that is situated here. So then we pay off the loan, which is the remaining loan amount, and then the effective gain that we'll have here is roughly the $7.4 million. So how our model works is, our model is based on a partnership model. The partnerships are the three people or the three parties involved. The first party is obviously the investor, which provides the equity. The second partner is the project sponsor. This is the company that is the partner on the ground in a specific location, which just got the experience and the track record to run these type of projects. They are the second partner, and obviously Migrate, which is the partner that's putting the whole deal together. That is the third party. The idea is that we pay to the investor effectively twice the rate of capital cost. This is what we call the hurdle rate. In America, as you saw on the previous pages, the interest amount is 4.13%, so roughly double that we pay the investor for the money that they invested in the project. And once they invested, or once we paid the hurdle rate to the investor, we believe that we are on the same playing ground, can I just say, or can I figure of speech I can say. So that means that the profit that we make over and above the 8%, we share with the investor. And typically, we share that the investor gets half of the super profit, as we call it, and the second half of the super profit gets shared with Migrate and the actual sponsor. Now, what is significant about this is that means that the partners are in bed for the investment period. So it means that Wealth Migrate and the partners only, or the sponsors only really make the money at the end of the project. And that is a significant fee.
The big difference between us and the traditional syndication model is that the syndication earns all their money up front in terms of fees, in terms of raising capital, and the traditional funds and REITs earn the majority of their income with their 2 and 20, where they make their fees all the way through the process. We only have costs up front, and then there's fees. Most of the people have fees through the process. We don't have any management fees. And as Michiel says, we effectively have created a model where, as investors, we want to invest and we want to be treated exactly the same way. And so we believe that the people that are managing the project should only get their returns after they've outperformed, and the investor should get the first returns. And that's exactly what Michiel's saying. The bottom line is we only win after the investors won.
No, that's super. And this spreadsheets we have sent to each and every investor, so they know exactly how the profits is being calculated, and what Wealth Migrate is going to earn, what they are going to earn, and what is the sponsor going to earn. So it's also a very clear model of complete transparency. And then lastly, I touched a lot of questions from investors that they wanted to know what would their share be if, for instance, they invested $500,000. In this specific case, they would have had an 8.7% share of the investment. And then they wanted to know what would their income returns would be. And here I've calculated for them on a quarterly basis, and then the capital return at the end. So that was also very clear for each investor. They could have changed this amount to whatever they actually invested. In this specific case, the minimum investment was $100,000. The main reason why we've kept it at that level is that the smaller that amount is, the more investors there would be. And if the investor amount the number of investors go, say, over 35 to 40 investors, it becomes a little bit unmanageable. So we found the happy medium is about $100,000, and in this case we had actual 27 investors. Right, so I think I'm also conscious of time. I just would like to quickly skip to the legal framework that this investment was done in. As you saw, we had a lot of parties. The parties that is basically forming this partnership. So if you can see my screen here at the bottom, I'm going to make it a little bit bigger. At the bottom here, we've got a holding company. Okay, so the holding company was the actual LLC, which contained title deeds of the actual properties. This is also the company which holds the debt, and then the investors were all clustered in a separate LLC. It's simply just to say all the 27 investors were members of that LLC, and that LLC contributed the equity portion to the holding document. So I don't want to go into all the technical details about this, but what we have really done quite a lot of research with Grant Thornton, as Scott mentioned, and we also did specific due diligence from a tax perspective on this, is that the limited liability company legal entity in the United States is by far the best structure to use for holding property investments in the United States. We use that quite regularly also for direct investments. So you'll see on top, individual investor, if they would have liked to participate in this deal, they would have their own LLC. So their own LLC is the vehicle in which they invest in the investor LLC, and in return, investor LLC invest in the holding company. So the other main reason for the investor LLC and all the LLCs are that these LLCs has a very special tax approach, in the sense that you can make the tax rules of the LLC the rules called partnership, And what it means in layman's terms, it means that the profit that is generated in a holding company can simply be conduited right through the investor LLC, right to the investor itself. So that's a very significant advantage for the investor, because the investor will actually get pre-tax profits directly from the investment, and they would only pay the tax in their personal or LLC capacity or personal capacity. So that's very nice. If you have a negative investment or an investment that requires input, and you get a capital or an income amount from this investment, you can offset it in your own LLC. That's a very, very powerful tax strategy that investors can use. So our whole aim is to bring the profit as quick as possible to the investor. And in our specific case, we don't want to pay the tax in the investment vehicle. We water and give all that benefits through to the investors. And also in America, we have a significant advantage where we can write off the actual value of the building. So it's a depreciation tax write-off, and that write-off we also distribute towards the investors. Yeah, so from that perspective, that is the structure of it. What we do in the holding company, we also give a mandate to the property management company. And what we do there is effectively give them very strict budgets and parameters in which they must manage this building on our behalf. And that we have done. And then the effective management of this investment, or the managing director of the sponsor, which is Paul, Wealthgrade investment chairman, Mr. Henny Besaidenout. And then we have a lead investor, a gentleman called Alan Kainoch, which is a very experienced real estate commercial investment, and he's representing all the investors. So these are the three gentlemen that we will be having our first board meeting at the end of this month, and our first financial results actually came in yesterday for the month of September. And the idea would be that these gentlemen will review this result and obviously give the property manager guy instructions if needed, if anything needs to be attended to. So that's a good overview of the structures. As you can see, all the blue blocks here are the agreements that we had to do. So our lawyers was quite busy, and we obviously had to orchestrate that these agreements work in tandem to ensure the best possible protection and safety for the investors. And it's also pretty powerful basic legal operational agreements. As you can see, we had to do a very special one in Delaware. It's a very specific one for this type of investments. So that legal expertise, we have got access to them in Atlanta. They have helped us to actually set this up so that this is very, very specialized agreements and to deal with this large amount of large transactions. So that's in a nutshell the process alluded to here. That is the bottom structure here, which is the legal contracts. And yeah, in parallel to that, obviously we raised the money. And yeah, the final outcome was that we closed on the 29th of August. We had, yeah, sorry, I said 27, we had 25 investors. It was fascinating right over the world. A majority of them basically had $100,000, and then some significant investors as well. And then I think something that I think Scott and Brennan and Henny can be extremely proud of, the first Wealth Migrate investment was the Westminster project, which started in 2012. They have actually the project completed above the projected IRR, and all the investors then choose to take the profit which they made, which is the $350,000, and roll that from the Westminster project into this next project. So they actually got now another investment out of the existing investment. So that's an extremely powerful strategy that we can use in the United States, because there is a very nice tax break, which they call the 1031 exchange. in a nutshell, that means that if you take your property profit, which you have made, specifically your capital gains, you can reinvest that capital gains in another project, a property project, as long as it is in a property project. You don't have to pay the capital gains at that point. You can delay your capital gains until, let's say, after the next project, and you cash out of properties and then only pay that tax. That means that you can extend or delay your capital gains tax payments for as long as you stay in property, and obviously on the value of that tax you can get additional gains, say, let's say for the next 10 years, and then only pay the tax. So that's a very, very efficient way of transferring your profits into the next deal and growing your portfolio, which is our ultimate aim, to grow the portfolio as quick and fast as possible. All right, so that was the deal summary. Just the final figures. The current the debt was 10.44. We ended up costing us 16.219 million. The project IRR currently is 20.2. As remember, we also built in some safety factors, and the investor IRR is 15.26, and we have set a stretch target for ourselves to actually improve that to 16, and we obviously translated that stretch target into, remember what I said, we have to reduce the expenses on the buildings, so we also made a budget for each building with a targeted value for expenses, which the property management company must reach. And this is what we call the operational expense value play. Why we call it like that is because if we can reduce the expenses, we can increase the building price, and when we sell it off, we can get a higher price for that, and that's the main reason why the investor returns can be improved. So from that perspective, in anybody's terms, a 16% IRR on such a capital amount is significant. And therefore, some of the investors has already approached us and said to us, it's such an exceptional deal, would you not consider going or continue with this investment period from a 5 maybe till a 10-year period? We have agreed to that, depending on the actual vote of the investors. So in year 5, the investors has the right to cash out or to continue. And we have calculated that we can accommodate roughly 20 to 30% of the investors we can pay out without significantly damaging the returns of the project. If the majority of the investors says no, they would like to have their money out, obviously this project will end, and then hopefully at that point in time, if investors would like, they could roll their profits into the next Wealth Migrate project. Yeah, Scott, I think from my side, that is pretty much the gist of it. We're just now in the operational phase. Like I mentioned, first results is out, and first quarter distributions to the actual investors is planned for December, hopefully just before Christmas, a nice Christmas present, so that we can be sure that this investment is on track, what we have promised. Yeah, so I think that is the due diligence process.
Thank you very much, Michiel. I really, really appreciate it. I got a couple more questions here. Anton said you mentioned that there are no ongoing fees, which I appreciate and think is a great model. What are the upfront costs associated with Migrate or partner on the ground for the setup? So it's there are costs involved. It's what we call the due diligence and setup costs, and they're all outlined in the project brief. But it's costs that would be expected, Anton, that you would pay if you did it on your own, in terms of all the legal setup fees, all the due diligence costs, the bank financing costs in terms of setup. So we very much, our model is that we're not in the game to make a profit on the front end or in the middle, but to profit with the investors on the back end. We like to co-invest in projects with our own capital. We tend to say to people, our dollars are the same color green as yours. We treat it in exactly the same way. There's not different class A, B, C shares. There's no funny middle management structures that are siphoning off money with Alteria. And in simple terms, we just want transparency. We want it to be simple. and we want you to be treated the same way as we expect to be treated ourselves. Clive Miller said that adds up to 3.5 million equity. Clive, it was made up of a number of investors that ranged from $100,000 through to $1 million plus. And in simple terms, the really exciting thing with this deal was that it was $6 million that was raised on 5 different continents, with less than 10% of it actually raised in the United States of America. More than 1/3 of it was females, which is fascinating. And the last thing that I found absolutely amazing was that it was from as far afield as Pakistan. One gentleman was working in the embassy in Pakistan, found a Google ad, went online, liked what he saw, invested through the internet, and invested $300,000, and someone else as far afield as Thailand in terms of where they are. Michiel, I am conscious of the time. I'm just going to take it back to myself quickly on the screens and just share with people just the last couple of slides just to effectively end off here. And I think really the last bit that I want to share is how did we save $1 million just on that particular deal. And you can actually see us here in Atlanta. You can see you had Dr. Dolph de Roos, who was online tonight. You've got Yaku, you've got Henny Poseidon, you've got Paul, you've got myself with a video camera, which is fairly normal. You've got Bruce Saunders there. I'm not sure, Michiel, where you were, but you were there at the time. So in terms of where we were looking, and this was us checking out the deal. And as I said to you, Henny Poseidon is our chairman. He's been in medical since 1992. He's currently building 14 hospitals in South Africa. It looks like we managed to do another deal for another 10 hospitals. He's also doing hospitals in Zambia and Kenya, and got medical interests in Australia and now in the US. And certainly when you're getting into something like this as niche and as specialized, you want to be dealing with people. Paul, the gentleman actually here, who's on the ground in Atlanta, he's been in medical for about 20 years. And so it really was a marriage made in heaven for expertise and specialities in the medical field. And just to give you an example, the sellers gave us the full performance overview, which is what Michiel was talking about. And I just want to, at a very high level, show people, if you look at the tenant improvements, they actually spoke about $20 per square foot for new tenants and $10 per square foot for renewal. Now, Paul's brother owns a construction company with his 20 years of experience. He said there's no ways. It's about $40 per square foot for a renewal and about $140 per square foot for a new tenant. And by doing that, just that alone, we managed to get the sales price to come down by $1 million from the seller. And the beauty for everybody, but Anton specifically, is we passed on every single cent to the investor. There was no fee, there was no contribution, there was no 20th century trying to hide it and take it for ourselves. Every single cent was passed on to the investor as per we would like it, in terms of ourselves. So I think Michiel has been through all these systems. All that I wanted to share with you was that the beauty of our crowdfunding platform, Luke asked a little bit earlier, who and which crowdfunding platform? Well, we've got our own one. It's wealthmigrate.com. And there's 4 simple steps. You sign up, you select the investment, you do the entire transaction online, and then you manage your entire portfolio. So everything that Michiel has shown you, and we are building this out as fast as we can, but everything that you've seen there, all our systems, the entire GID system, is all being built into the Wealth Migrate platform and will be accessible from a transparency perspective, so that when you want to invest, no matter how sophisticated you are, it'll be like investing personally with either Dr. Dolph de Roos or Donald Trump or whoever it is, Henny Poseidon. The reason being is that in the same steps they go through to make sure that they do stuff and they can reduce the risk and increase the safety, you as an investor will be given the same access. And the best part is that you'll be given access and transparency so you can learn every step of the way. I wanted to share a gift with you. I did say that I'd share a gift with you. In our book, Property Going Global, we've actually, chapter 12, we've got the 5 things you need to know to create wealth through property. We've got the 6 things you need to know and ask before you invest offshore. And there's also an entire report on how to make a successful buying trip. And I will send that through to everyone that is on this webinar today as a matter of interest. For people that are watching it retrospectively, if you go to propertygoingglobal.com. So propertygoingglobal.com. You will be able to get access to the book and ultimately the technology. And Michiel spoke about this, but this is our global property system. It changes all the time. The system doesn't change, but the fundamentals, the facts, the stats, and the research consistently changes, and then that adapts the model based on what happens. And most people try and make decisions based on gut feel. It doesn't work like that. You need to have a scientific and systematic formula to be able to help you. And this was based on Clem Sunter, one of the world's most advanced and respected scenario planners. And we built a 4-dimensional model based on his technology, and he endorsed it. And I should have probably mentioned it on the book, but he actually endorsed the model and is the reason that he's the foreword on the book and in terms of endorsing the model and what we do. So a simple plan going forward. Well, the best way forward, if you really want to understand this stuff, is to sit down in a consultation with one of the asset managers. We've got various asset managers around, whether you're in America, South Africa, Singapore for that matter. We're going to be all over the place. We can sit down with you. We specifically have a number of opportunities in South Africa in November. We're coming out to Singapore in October. We've got people going to America now. Jacob Moritz is actually on an airplane today as we speak. I'm off to Australia on Monday. And I know Dr. Dolf de Roos and I and Brendan Brown are coming to Singapore, Malaysia, and Bali, and then Hong Kong by the end of this year. So whether you want to invest in the US, Australia, the UK, South Africa, and multiple other jurisdictions, we can sit down with you and understand what it is you're looking to achieve and then help you make the right decisions. I'd suggest you read the book if you want to understand the philosophy of how we invest and where we invest. And then ultimately join us at a live event. You know, we have live events all around. We have online events. And as an example, we've actually got this live event, which is coming up in Singapore. And the event is going to be called Safely Creating Global Wealth. And Dr. Dolf de Roos is going to be the main keynote speaker. And effectively, he's going to be looking at the emerging trends in global real estate and looking primarily from a perspective of safety as to what's changing, how it's changing, how people can take advantage of some of the best opportunities globally, but with safety and wealth preservation as their number one objective. Myself and Emmanuel Uching will also be sharing with you. It's the 30th of October from 6 p.m. to 9 p.m. at the Ritz-Carlton in Millenia, and it's on 7 Raffles Avenue. And I will send you the link. In fact, let me do that now. I'll just send through the chat link here. So that's the address. I'll send through the link a little bit later. In terms of extra value on the evening, there's a number of different things. Each person that will attend will be given a free copy of both Dr. Dolf de Roos's book and Scott Picken's book. We'll give you, for people who invest, they'll get free access to Dr. Dolf de Roos's books, courses, and even his software, depending on their level of investment. It's one of the most advanced training systems there is on real estate worldwide. For very few specific Platinum Inner Circle investors, there'll be opportunity to meet with Dr. Dolf de Roos one-to-one, either online or in person, and actually discuss their investment portfolios, their strategies, and the best way forward. And finally, there will be the opportunity to invest and partner with Dr. Dolf de Roos in some of the opportunities he's looking at, along with Michiel, myself, Henny, and the rest of the people on the investment committee. So it is really, really exciting. And, you know, the question I would have is what's stopping you? You know, that is the mobile number. The country code is +27 and then 725758719. If you're in South Africa, you don't need the country code. The email is mersha@wealthmigrate.com. If you want to look at our global website, it's wealthmigrate.com. If you want to look at our Singapore website, it's wealthmigrate.com.sg. And actually, I should have put it there. If you want to look at our South African website, believe it or not, that should be there as well. It's wealthmigrate.co.za. I'm not sure if you even know, Michiel, but that went live today.
Wow, that's good news.
And then the Eventbrite for the Singapore event is wealthmigrate.eventbrite.com. So hopefully that gives you a huge amount of information. If you want to get hold of us, just text us. or WhatsApp us, whatever's easiest on that number. You've got an email, you've got the different websites. I really want to thank everyone for being online tonight. I know it's been a long webinar, but unfortunately, to try and condense 227 years of experience down into then deciding which macro market, which country, which industry, which partner, which product, and ultimately what we were going to invest in. I mean, just that process alone took Michiel and the entire team over 4 months. So I want to applaud you for being online. Michiel, thank you so much for sharing in the essence of our company and trust and transparency. Everything from our side we like to share with people. I'm sure that a lot of people in the 20th century would be cringing at the fact that we're showing everyone all our inner circle secrets, if you want to call it that. But for me, the whole philosophy and value of our company is trust, transparency, and our interests being aligned. And really, I want to applaud both Dr. Dolph de Roos, who shared at a macro level, and you who shared in effectively the engine room as to how it really works. And for people that need to understand who we are, what we do, why we do it, and most importantly, how they can engage with us, hopefully that has opened their eyes. So thank you both to Dr. Dolph de Roos and to yourself for that.
Thank you very much.
It says here, do you have to be in the US to invest in Wealth Migrate? As it seems it's based on address, phone numbers. So the answer to that is no. And as with it's the global real estate marketplace, and you can invest from anywhere. And again, we've got the South African website for South African specific projects. But if you do have any challenges, you've got the number, you've got the email address. Mersha specifically is an absolute star in assisting people. And the good news is as well, our app will be ready by the end of the month, according to our developers, which we always have a bit of a laugh when it comes to technology people. But anyway, that's what we've been told. So that's where we're at. Are there any more questions? Anything else that I haven't answered? Okay, the last one is from Sam here, Michiel. It just says that it's quite overwhelming and daunting, all this information and research and due diligence. When someone is not at this level of expertise, how does one understand exactly what's going on and partake and take advantage?
Scott, my answer to that one would be is that a person must just simply start educating himself as much as possible. I think an absolute good place to start is with your books, also with Dolph's books. Like you have mentioned, you started with Dolph's book. I started in '99 with Dolph's book, and it really gives you a really good basic. So the Real Estate Riches from Dolph de Roos, I can 10 times over recommend. Start with that book, then progressively work yourself up as you get your understanding more and more. Dolph has also got a fantastic book on commercial real estate, which I've learned a hell of a lot from. So yeah, my answer is just start educating yourself, and you would be quite surprised how quickly you pick things up. And then when you deal with us on specific investments, specifically when we go through the spreadsheets, I take a lot of trouble to actually show the basics, and if the person don't understand, we go over and over till they understand. The biggest pleasure for us is that investor really understands the investment and then also get the comfort that they're doing a safe investment. And nothing gives us better satisfaction like things that Westminster investors that they've gone through the process with that and actually got the returns. And yeah, so Sam, if there's any specific questions you want to pose to us, just write them in the chat box and we'll try and answer them as good as we can.
Perfect. Well, listen, I want to thank everyone. I think it's been a long session, Michiel, but certainly a very valuable one. And to all of you out there, hopefully we've shed some light. Our passion is to help people create global wealth safely. And most importantly, we want to give you the knowledge, the systems and the strategies so that you can make educated and informed decisions. You can invest with confidence and you can create global wealth. Thank you to all of you, and we look forward to sharing with you, investing with you, and hopefully meeting up and having lots of fun in the process.
Thank you. Bye.